Okay, so hi everyone, and I actually don't really know how exactly this looks and sounds, but I hope it will be good enough. And I actually don't even know how I should title this video, because it is supposed to be an introductory video for the upcoming speaker reviews that I'm planning to do, but I also wanted to give you a little bit of a background of what I know about speakers and how I want to actually evaluate them, because this is very important, because something like headphones that I've reviewed, it's always the same thing, because once you have them on your head, they kinda do what they do, of course in combination with the amp. But a speaker is just, after all, something quite different, especially since the room has a big important factor. And the smaller speakers I will definitely review in this room, but I think the bigger ones, once I get to those, I will have to go into my main room, the living room, because that one just gives me more space. Even though I have to say that at least this room, and you can see the walls, the side walls, is not ideal, because on this wall there is a big window, on the back wall there is a big window, and on this side there is no window at all. So acoustically this is not perfect. I've done what I could in terms of curtains and also a carpet, a little bit of some optimization, but there's still a lot of things to do, because as you can see at the bottom, the cables and such, these are going away. Once I have finished reviewing all those speakers that I still have for quite a while already, because then I can rearrange the cables all new and such. But I would say let's actually start from the beginning. My very first, and I'm not going completely all the way back, but the first time when I started to get into, I would say, more sophisticated sound, which was, I don't know how many years ago, but with the Monitor Audio RS8. I paid, I think, like 800 for those, maybe 1,000, I'm not 100% sure, it's been such a long time. And that was pretty much my entry. Monitor Audio, for those who don't know, a British company, makes loudspeakers, really nice ones. They actually don't really do that many as they did a while ago, and they kind of specialized, and yeah, nice thing. And I had those for about 2 years, and then just the thing started. Audiophiles definitely know you always want to find something better. And then I jumped to the GS20, which I didn't like so much. Then I, for example, also noticed that buying just new ones is too expensive. And that's definitely something that I will consider in my reviews as well, because the RS8 I got new, but the GS20 already I bought from someone else who owned them, so they were used, and you just save so much money. Especially when I got, for example, my third pair then, which was the GS60 from Monitor Audio, so their gold line, the GS60, golden signature I think it was, but I'm not 100% sure anymore. And for those I actually paid since they were used, and I had luck because maybe the buyer didn't quite know how much they are still worth. I got them cheaper, even though they were quite new. I got them very, very cheap, and I used them for, I think, 2 years before I upgraded once again and sold them with profit. So that is definitely something that you have to consider. And my tip will always be, if you can find them for a good price, and if that's what you want, buy them used. Use them for as long as you want to, and you pretty much won't use either money at all, or you will actually make some money. And that was pretty much the chance where I noticed if I buy new used ones, I can just get higher end ones than I would be able to get with new ones. And then, for example, I bought the Swans, I think F2.2, massive bombers. They were like, I think, 60 or 80 kilograms a piece. They were actually 3 pieces stacked up on each own, and they looked amazing. I mostly bought them because of the great design. I love that, because I love huge speakers. And then I just noticed one thing. I bought them based, also used though, I bought them based on a review from a German site that is very well known. Not gonna name the name, but everyone in Germany who knows this site, you know it's a little bit hard to trust them, because they praise pretty much everything, and the worst possible product still gets a great something, and then they go up in all different kind of crazy categories. And this was where I got a little bit angry, because I bought them based on their recommendation, and I didn't like them at all, because for their size, bass was not tight, it wasn't punchy, it was nothing high, sounded very weird and such, and they were actually worse than my GS60 that were noticeably cheaper and so on. So I had them for a year, because I just didn't want to get, maybe I had them longer, but I just didn't want to get rid of them, because they sounded acceptable, and I kind of thought in my head, said they aren't that bad and so on. I tried to get better amps and such to improve it, but it didn't really help. So I sold those as well. Fortunately enough, I got the exact same price back, or the money back that I paid for them, so it was okay. And then I'm not quite sure what happened. I think that actually would have been already the start of when I went into do-it-yourself, because I noticed those were new, I think like 5,000 euros a pair, or very close to that, the Swans. And I just noticed I was already in the $3,000 range, $5,000 range now. And I just wanted to get noticeably higher, but didn't really want to pay that much. And then I just checked forums and so on. And I just noticed that for do-it-yourself speakers, you can get something so much higher for that price that I will willing to pay. And I went to a few different kind of do-it-yourself speaker builders or creators, designers, checked some other ones, of course, aware of on many, what's that called, events where you can check them. And there I just heard what's the possibility of actually quite cheap ones, because if you can see them, the brown ones, those aren't actually expensive. I think if you just get the kit, it was back then like I think 400 euros, maybe a little bit more. Of course, you then have to get into the hole you have to build, and that costs a little bit extra. But if you can do it on your own, it's actually not that expensive. I personally had someone who built them for me, very, very cheap, and it would have been actually cheaper than if I would have had to get the tools and build them on my own. So that was a good thing. And the same thing also happened with actually the speakers that I use for my own. I can maybe show them later on. But those were the ones that I had designed. I, of course, as you can see, maybe took some inspiration from, I think it was the Avalon speakers, not quite so sure anymore that it has been so long, because I had these for like 8 years already by now. He built them to me. I told him what I wanted them to be looking like. Of course, he then took into consideration what you kind of need in terms of what is it, size or liters to get the volume out of that, the correct sizing and so on, and also the back ones that I have along with the center and so on. And what I paid for those is definitely not a little. But I also used a little bit better internal components, so I didn't take the stock ones. I paid a little bit extra, even though many said it doesn't actually help, because this speaker system was kind of designed that you don't need high-end stuff, and pretty much standard components, internal ones for the electrics and for the boards and such don't need much. But I just said, if I'm going to pay so much already, then I'm going full in. I paid that. And altogether, I can say what I paid. I paid $4,800. That was with everything, if I remember stuff properly, with the building and such. But since it was one of his first projects, he didn't really wanted too much money from me. And they are on a level of something way higher. And I would say at least something that is worth 4 or 5 times as much. But getting back to the whole speaker reviewing now. So now you know where I'm coming from, what I've heard already by now. I've heard definitely already way more on events, but what I had here, the most important ones I've mentioned. So pretty much not actually that much, but speaker systems obviously are something that you don't really change too much. You usually settle on something that you like, because it's not something like a headphone. You can't really just change it wherever, especially, for example, my big ones, I can't really move them. They are so heavy, and as you have seen, due to the shape, not really easy to carry around. So they are pretty much fixed. And in this place, I can still do that because, yeah. But the problem is the room is a little bit small. The bigger ones I will have to try back there. But about the what's it actually called? The one that you can buy, the ready speakers. I'm not sure. I just can't remember the name. How I will evaluate them? Well, of course, you always have to take into consideration the room, but also the amp. It's not just the speaker. And I would actually say that the amp and the room have a bigger impact on the sound than the speaker itself. Of course, the speaker is always the bass, but how much you get out of that makes really a huge impact. And I noticed that once I had the brown ones here with my very old stereo receiver actually back then, just because I didn't have anything else at the moment, and they sounded okay. Then I went to the Cambridge Audio CX-A80 that I have here with the Cambridge Audio Aeromax 2 in for review. And it was a huge jump. Everything got just so much bigger. The sound sounded so much more structured, more detailed. And the room actually wasn't really that much of an issue. And of course, obviously, once I switch to this one, which is the one I will keep, I guess, is the Azure. I think, is it the 851? Yeah, it's the 851 stereo speaker, stereo amp, integrated amp. And that one even improved things more, because the CX80 is still kind of like mid-range. This is Cambridge Audio's high-end. Something soon already was announced, the bigger series, the Edge series, but that's a little bit too much for me, I have to say. But those, I think, got a lot of potential out of them. Of course, you could go way crazier, because once I did that, I tried some super huge mono blocks, just amplifiers along with a preamplifier and such. But I noticed that for the amount you pay extra for that, and it was actually very troublesome, because it took up so much juice that my whole power in my house actually had trouble, and it sometimes actually blew out my fuses and so on. So I decided that's just not worth it. The minimal better sound that I get is just not worth the trouble and the extra money. If you have a serious system, something really huge, you need that. But I'm still not really ever gonna try to get crazy high-end. I would still try to leave it affordable, especially with the first ones that I'm gonna review. Like, for example, the Aeromax 2, you can't really see them all that well. They cost 500 a pair. That's not too much. Then, for example, these one cost like 880 Wando, and these one are like 100 more, so like 2,000 a pair. But these are active ones, so these are powered on their own. The other ones you need an amplifier for, like for example the CX80. Even though I would say the CX80 works almost is too high. The CX60 would already do with the Aeromax 2, but for my bigger ones, definitely you notice the difference between a CX80 and an Azure. Now, will I also review different integrated amplifiers? If I can, I definitely will, because I've noticed that there is a difference. And of course, you always have to have kind of ground-based. That's where I will use the Azure 851 for, to kind of evaluate what is the common denominator here if I don't take the room into consideration. And then I will have to try some other ones, because there are definitely differences. And every different brand has their different signature, and not just for their speakers, but for their amps. I've noticed that back when I, for example, because of home audio or home theater systems, I was more into receivers, AV receivers, than into stereo. Now I'm actually back more into stereo, and in this room, home theater wouldn't really work. I tried, for example, I started off with an Onkyo, then I went to Denon. I had also Yamaha, where it's actually where I settled on, because Pioneer and all those, they had just different sound signatures that with my gear just didn't work as well. Because that's actually also something very important. You can't just take even though it would be kind of, if that's the thing, the best possible amplifier, or let's say in this case an AV receiver, and just combine it with every speaker system. Because, for example, the system that I had back then with the monitor audios just did not work at all with Denon. It sounded completely clogged up. It didn't sound energetic. It didn't sound dynamic at all. With the monitor audios and my Yamaha, then it sounded great. And my Yamaha still, even though it's super old by now, I hope I can upgrade that also quite soon, but it's expensive after all. With my speakers and the Yamaha, that works nice. The Yamaha is actually, I would say, one of the easiest ones to pair with, because it had a nice signature that worked with everything. It wasn't like, for example, the Onkyos that I've used, they sounded very, very huge, but not really natural, just not quite what I like to. Maybe the different ones by now, the new ones are different, but that's the thing. For example, I will try to go on high-end 2018, which will be in May, to get in contact with some brands, because I want to try what, also in the AV receiver segment, what Onkyo has to offer, what Denon has to offer, what Pioneer has to offer, and what's still there. Yamaha, obviously, but they don't really reply to me that much anymore. But getting back to the speakers finally, and to get actually to the point, how will I evaluate them? Well, I'm not gonna do it in the same way that I do it with headphones, because for headphones I'll always look for something a little bit, definitely way more natural, kind of something flat. And if my dream sound signature would be something, that it would be a little bit on the warmer side, if at all, but just slightly, but in general slightly bright and open, so not something really cold, even though my current headphones are quite cold, but I could fix it with an amp. And that just shows the thing. If you have speakers that are quite cold, or maybe not bright, you can kind of equalize that with the proper amp. Now, the good thing about, for example, the Nubuds that are self-powered, those are usually absolutely already kind of matched perfectly together, and this shows, because the way these are, You don't need to think about what kind of amp would I need. You don't have to try. They optimize it, and if they have done it right, which obviously I will cover in my review, you don't really need to bother anymore. And that's the great thing about, for example, the Aeromax. Obviously, you would usually expect that from a brand that you have the loudspeakers, also the amp would sound matching, and usually that's the case because they kind of match them, they kind of design them in tandem with them. So it makes sense. But for example, you can't just buy Denon speakers because they don't really make Denon speakers or Pioneer. Yes, some of them have some specific lines, also maybe some home theater systems. But if you're talking about systems, or especially if you go into the really big brands, like for example, I don't mean, let's say Heco or Magnat actually has by now amps, or maybe I just can't think of any brands, but more exotic ones that just don't have electronics. There it's a little bit harder to find something, and you really just need to know their signature. You kind of need to try them, and that's also just a very important factor that I will never be able to completely evaluate properly in my reviews. It's the room. I have this room, I have the other room. Okay, if I would need, I have one more, but the thing is, it won't ever sound the same as it does in your room, because I've heard speakers in certain rooms that were maybe optimized or not optimized at all, and then I had them here and they didn't sound anything like that. And that's something that will be hard to say, because not every speaker actually works in every room, because the big ones that I have, my own one, my main ones, I don't think they would work in this room. They would be just too much. They would be too close to the walls, and the bass would just destroy everything. You would have to maybe use a DSP or something to fix that, but that's something. But the way I'm gonna actually have to talk about the sound signature on speakers is that my sound signature is different than what I prefer on, for example, headphones, because on a speaker, for me, it's very important that it has a lot of oomph. I don't mean in a non-audiophile oomph way, but I mean I want to feel the pressure waves, because the bass that my speakers can produce can move so much air that my whole sitting thing, my couch or whatever I sit on actually vibrates, and it's the air, you feel the pressure. But this has no impact on the sound at all, because this is usually sub bass that doesn't really have an impact on the sound itself. But bass is very important for me. I want a very warm bass, though I have to say that I don't like cold on speakers at all, and I don't like thin. If they have any gaps, especially between the mids and the bass, it just sounds awful. Or if you just have too much bass and then the mids can't really equalize that, it just doesn't work. So I want something that is very balanced. Balanced on a speaker is super important, because I want the deep bass, but not too much of it. I want just a nice bass, if at all, slightly warm, but I don't want it to be overemphasized, because then just mids get out of control, and the highs, I want still highs. Highs are very something important for me, but compared to the headphones that I like, I don't really like harsh highs. I want them slightly softened up, for example. I don't like it too bright, because in a room that just gets into frequencies that just don't sound at all well, and I listen very loud, and highs don't need to be there. But of course I will talk about how speakers sound, but I'm not absolutely going into any measurements or going into deep into something analytic. It's more about the experience. How easy is it to drive? How does it generally sound? How easy it works in the room? Because, for example, these work absolutely great in the room. They don't really have a huge impact from the acoustic or from the room acoustics, where, for example, something like the Teufel that you can't even see, those don't work that well in every room. So how well they work with amps, how well they work with the room, how easy they work in every room, what kind of sound signature they produce, and what's the overall experience. Because at the end, I think there's not too much of a gray zone for speakers for me. Either I like it or I don't like it. And if I like it, what specifically do I like? Or if I don't like it, what specifically don't I like? I think that's what I will cover in a way that will be quite easy to understand. Maybe for the in-depth audiophiles, it will be too shallow, because they won't see 5 hertz, 5 kilohertz or something like that. There was something, or it was too rough. And this is just something I don't really care about. This is not what I want to do, because For example, in the photography segment, there are pixel peepers. They look into every single thing. The same goes also for audiophiles. There are someone that just analyze everything and they say, oh, there is a dip at this frequency, and there's at this frequency. For me, it's still at the end. There is something like a bass, mids and highs, and something little in between. But I don't care about certain frequencies unless there's something wrong. That is something that is way easier to see on a headphone, because if I could talk about certain frequencies, especially in the lower end range, it doesn't really matter, because it mostly is actually my room. And I can't just say, oh yeah, it sounds way too bloated in the bass region, if that's not the issue of the speaker, but of my room. So I will try to do my best to explain it as good as I can, as easy to understand as I can, but still give you at least not maybe too much information, because I don't want to go too deep, but I want to give you the best possible amount of information on a way to understand it from an experience standpoint, because after all, everything is about experience for me, and speakers are the most satisfying experience if done right. So I hope this covers it. I'm not actually sure how long this video is. Let me just check. Oh yeah, 20 minutes, actually not that terrible. You got quite a lot of information out of it. And yes, I will mostly do them in sweatpants, because it's just way more comfortable in this chair to talk about them. And what you won't see usually, obviously, in my reviews is a lot of nice cinematography or something like that. It's just me talking. I guess actually audiophiles don't usually have an issue with that, because the people that usually make cinematic videos and those who watch it are more people who are watching just something for the eye candy. I'm not about eye candy. I'm just about experience, information, and yeah. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, until next time.